Okay, good morning, people. Let's see who's here already. Baha's here. Good morning, Baha. Hossam's here. Good morning, Hossam. KC is here. Good morning, KC. Good morning, Erica. Good morning, Karen. Good morning, Jimmy. And good morning, Krish. Hope everyone's doing okay out there. How are you feeling on Thursday? Good? So so? How are you feeling? Masheed's here. Good morning, Masheed. Good morning, Justin. How are you guys feeling? Okay? If you had to describe your mood in an emoji, which emoji would it be? Hmm. That looks pretty. That's very straight faced there, Karen. I don't know how to. I don't know how to interpret that. Oh, Casey, sleepy. Yeah, I feel a little sleepy too, Casey. I'm hoping the coffee kicks in right away. Mm-hmm. Uh oh, frowny face. Frowny face. That's not good. I don't know if it's different online, but I found that when we were in class, Thursday was always a bit of a low day because everybody had been in school for 4 days straight, but it still wasn't Friday, like it still wasn't the weekend. So on Friday, everybody gets a little bit of a boost of energy, but on Thursday, everyone feels kind of the. So I don't know if that's the case. We've got a sleepy emoji and a sad emoji and a pretty serious, straight-faced emoji. So, oh, okay. Either way, we'll deal with it, right? We'll get through it. Today, I just want to do two things. Yeah, good evening, Ivan. I just want to do two things today. The first thing I want to do is I want to go over the questions for the Understanding Racism article that we read yesterday, I believe, and a little bit the day before too. Thika, good morning. Um, I want to go over the questions from that, and then once we're done that, I want to give you some time to finish up that assignment that's going to be due tomorrow, I believe. Um, yeah, I'll give you some time to work on that. So we'll finish the questions on this article, and then I'll give you some free time. And um, tomorrow we'll try to talk about this very complicated topic of systemic racism. And so, if you've been listening to the news at all, you've probably heard in the last few days lots of people talking about systemic racism. Um, some people claiming very strongly that it exists and that we need to address it and dismantle it. Other people are confused. Other people are denying that it exists. And so there's a lot of discussion in the media happening on that topic right now. And as it turns out, that's exactly where we are. So tomorrow we'll try to figure out what this systemic racism thing is all about and how we can learn to see it. But for today, we'll just look at the article that we've already read, and then I'll give you some free time. Okay. Good morning, Jenna. That's okay. All right, but let's jump into it. Okay. I'll give you a little bit of a review of what we were talking about from a day or so ago. So we started off. I guess this was on Tuesday. We started off talking about race and ethnicity, and I asked you some questions about what is race and what race are you and who gets to say, can you change, and is it meaningful? Um, and so we said that this is a difficult topic to discuss. It's very emotionally charged, and in addition to being an emotionally charged topic, it is also a complicated one, and one that many people have not been kind of correctly educated about. And so there's a lot of potential for people to get upset and for misunderstandings because, again, people have not really been educated about what racism is and how it works, because there are institutional and economic interests that hold racism in place. Okay, there are lots of ideologies floating around, and even though some of those ideologies, like individualism and color blindness, they might seem benign, they might seem not harmful. In some cases, they actually can be, and so that's difficult to deal with as well. Some people have an emotional attachment to the opinions that they have that protect their worldview, and this is particularly true of people in dominant groups. And so, as it relates to racism, white people have a very strong emotional attachment to the idea that maybe racism isn't as bad as people say it is. Maybe that that they aren't implicated in it. They're actually not involved in this sort of system of racism. It's just, there's just a few bad people here and there, and so that can be difficult to navigate around too. And again, there are very real negative effects on minoritized groups, and that makes it difficult to talk about as well, because this is a serious problem. We said that the words race and ethnicity are sometimes used interchangeably, but they're not the same thing. We said that race is a social distinction, so it's a category we put people in based on how they look, right? And usually that has to do with skin tone. Sometimes it has to do with hair or noses or eyes or other things, but it's a social category that is based on appearance, whereas ethnicity is different, right? Ethnicity is connected to your culture, where your people come from, what your sort of language and religion and sort of shared history with the people is. So those are two different things, right? Race is a social category we put people in based on how they look. Ethnicity has to do with culture and language and religion and place of origin. And so we said very quickly on Tuesday or on Wednesday, I kind of forget now, that human beings are built with DNA, right? All of our features are encoded in DNA. And so we have 23, or at least most of us have 23 chromosomes that encode everything about us. However, if you look at all of those genes and you compare humans around the world, what you see is that we are overwhelmingly the same. We are basically 99.9% genetically similar. And so one of the things, and we'll talk about this from the article, one of the things that racism is kind of built on is that race is a real biological difference, right? And that different races are genetically different, and they are behaviorally and cognitively different as well. And there's just no evidence for that. There are, based on where your ancestors come from, you have likely inherited some genes that are connected to environmental adaptations. And we talked about skin color, darker skin as being sort of a protection from UV rays, lighter skin as being as allowing sun in order to synthesize vitamin D. And so depending on where in the world your ancestors come from, you have probably inherited some genes that are connected to the environment and environmental adaptations. But what we said is that there's very few of those genes, and they just don't make that much difference. When you're talking about, hundreds of thousands of genes and really billions of base pairs, a couple of genes here and there that code for skin color just doesn't make a difference. And really, we are overwhelmingly similar. No matter where in the world we come from, our genetics are similar. Um, and so there's really no such thing as a biological race in human beings. Biologically speaking, human beings have one race. There's just us. Um, we have been, all human populations have been connected to other human populations really since the beginning of our history. We've always kind of interbred with each other, and there are no races in humans. It's not a thing. Um, yeah, and so again, the things that our eyes pick up, the things that our eyes see, and the things that we perceive to be a big deal aren't. Genetically speaking, they just don't make that much of a difference. We're overwhelmingly similar animals. But we said that even if race isn't biologically real, it is a social reality. And one of the things that we've been trying to drive home here, good morning, Monica. One of the things I've been trying to drive home here is that things that are socially constructed are powerful. Okay, and so it doesn't. If a bunch of humans, if a group of humans believe a certain thing to be true, whether that thing is true or not doesn't matter, because just the fact that everyone believes it means that it has power and it will start to have effects, right? Yeah. So race is something that is socially constructed. It is not biologically meaningful, but because people believe it to be a meaningful difference, it has real consequences. It has actual significant effects in society. Okay, so again, when I asked you yesterday, is race meaningful? And some people said yes, and some people said no. You're both right. In some ways, it's not meaningful biologically, but socially, yeah, very, very meaningful, right? And so that led us to this article and a bunch of questions that I asked you based on it. Now, I talked about it briefly yesterday. And I said that there's a bit much in this article. We won't be able to really deal with everything that's in there, but I think most of the things in there are good, and they're things that we should know. And yeah, so let's dig into it. Okay, so the first question I asked you was this one. So according to the article, when and why does race emerge as a category of identity? When do people really start paying attention to an idea of race? Because they don't always, right? It's not always an important social category. It's not always an important way that people define themselves. And I think it says in the article that in the past, people's religion and the language they spoke was a far more important determinant of social category, and probably economic class as well, rather than race. But then race starts to appear as an important social category. And so what happens? Well, Karen says, yeah, colonization happens. If you know your world history, you'll know that through the 1800s, some Western European nations start to industrialize. So they start to build machines, and they start to build factories that can use machines to produce huge amounts of products, starting with textiles and cloth, but later other things. And they sort of create these industrialized countries create a system where they go to other places in the world, take them over in order to gain resources to bring them home, manufacture them into products, and then sell them to their people. And so for the industrialized countries, this made them hugely wealthy and hugely powerful. For the colonized nations, In most cases, it wound up being a disaster because their resources were taken from them. In many cases, their countries were controlled by the colonized nations. Colonizers didn't treat the colonized people very well. Um, yeah, it was an utter disaster for most colonized nations. But yeah, colonization happens, and so we have this kind of new sort of global economic system appearing. Mashid says it starts when Europeans start to colonize other country or other continents. Yeah, so um, yeah, so most of this is coming from Western European nations, right? Britain and France, and a little later Germany and the Netherlands. They start to colonize all around the world, right? And so Africa becomes heavily colonized. India is colonized, parts of the Middle East. And of course, once Christopher Columbus North and South America, discovers North and South America at the end of the 1400s, people start coming here, and colonization soon follows, right? Casey says it was when, okay, Europeans started colonizing based on continental differences such as physical characteristics. Okay, happens in the late 1800s. Okay, good. Um, so we've got kind of the when. Let me just see, what's my next question here? Okay, that's good. That's good. So the the process of colonization and the creation of race as a meaningful social category, those two things are connected. Okay, that's what the article is saying, and you've all kind of picked up on that, so that's good. Um, what does the article say is the official ideology of race? What does the article say is the official ideology of race? Okay, so Thika says that race is an exclusive category. Okay, so it means that every human on Earth can be put into one of these categories, right? And so the very earliest racial categories were sort of white. In some cases, non-white was a category. Black or African was a category. Asian was a category, and American was a category. So if you were an indigenous person from North and South America. So there were kind of these very few set of races, and everybody fit into one of them. The second part was that these different categories arose from nature. Okay, so there was some sort of natural biological difference between these different races, and that they were persistent. Okay, and so what they meant by this is that the character of people did not change. Okay, and so the idea here is that if white people are a certain way, they remain that way. Nothing really changes their essential character of what this group is like. And so generation after generation, they kind of remain the same. And it's the same for all of these races that were invented, is that once we kind of know what a race is like in terms of their character, that will persist for generations and generations, and there's really no way to change it. That's what this ideology of race is saying. Let me just have a look here. Just want to check one thing. Okay, I think that's good. Now, by the 1800s, they said that the article says that racial classifications have a purpose, and so people don't start creating social groups. They don't start creating racial groups and putting people into these groups for no reason. What's the reason for doing this? What's the reason for doing this? Okay, so okay. So Masheed says, so racial category was used to establish and preserve discriminatory social hierarchies. Yeah. And so we can talk about this a little bit more, maybe tomorrow. Yeah. So specifically with the creation of the United States, and the article explains this a little bit, it was a bit of a difficult situation because the United States was formed. When it was formed, the United States were a colony of Britain. So there were 13 colonies, they belonged to Britain, and the people living in the 13 colonies didn't like how Britain was treating them. They felt like they were being exploited. Some of the people in the 13 colonies were facing religious persecution as well, and they had left Europe to escape that. And so when the 13 colonies decide that they're tired of Britain sort of treating them as second-class citizens, they engage in a war, they kick the British out, and they create their own country. They create the United States. And so they signed their Declaration of Independence in, I think, 1774 or 1776. I don't know my American history perfectly. They signed that declaration, and the country itself, the United States, is created as a place where people can have life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, right? It's a place where people can work hard and achieve their dreams free from the domination of the British, right? It's a place of religious and personal freedom, where people can kind of pursue their goals, which sounds nice. But the thing is that those promises didn't extend to everyone, right? There was a significant population of Africans that had been brought to the New World, that had been brought to the 13 colonies in order to work on farms as slaves, right? So life, liberty, and happiness, was not going to be given to them. The same thing with First Nations people in the US, who the Americans had to sort of push out of the way in order to create their country that stretched from the Atlantic to the Pacific, right? So it's life, liberty, and happiness, but not for everyone, right? Only for some people. And so the question is that how can you justify treating some groups of people differently, right? How can you give life and liberty and happiness to one group of people and say, oh no, but not for you? And so race is one of the ways that people, white people in this case, justify the difference in their social hierarchy, right? And so not only are Black Americans excluded from the sort of rights and freedoms that white people have in the U.S., not only are they excluded from it, but they really don't deserve it, right? They don't deserve it. And why? Well, because they are less, right? They were seen as less intelligent, less trustworthy, less hardworking. And so why would you give them all this freedom when they wouldn't really know what to do with it? They would misuse it. Okay, so that was kind of the idea behind it. And so again, none of this has any basis in fact. It is all bonkers, crazy stuff, but people did believe it, and they used it to ensure that some people had rights and freedoms and opportunities and legal protections and other people didn't. And how they decided who had power and opportunity and who didn't was based on skin tone, right? It was based on these sort of artificial race categories that people had created. And so again, the categories are made up. The characteristics that they associate with each group, there's no evidence for, but it doesn't matter, right? Because people believe it, and then it has real and significant effects. And again, the effects of what happened in the US hundreds of years ago, we are still seeing right this minute, right? The death of George Floyd 2 weeks ago is connected to exactly what we're reading about here, where some people are brought to the United States, they're enslaved, and they are denied basic human rights and basic human freedoms. And again, that you can trace a very clear line all the way from what happened in the late 1800s all the way to what's happening today. Those things are connected. Okay, there's a few of these. So what beliefs are shared by race-based societies? So a society that feels that race is real and meaningful. What kind of things do these race-based societies believe? What kind of things do they believe? Okay. Okay. I'm not sure about this one, Karen, in terms of, I'm not sure that's what I was looking for from the article, but I will say that you're right. And this statement here has to do with, who the dominant group is, because the dominant group, whatever the dominant group in society is, whether it's men, whether it's white people, whether it's Christians, whoever it happens to be, the dominant group is the one who gets to say what's cool, okay? They're the ones who get to say what is respected. They're the ones who get to define those things. And so, again, it's not shocking that there is this kind of perception that lighter skin equals better looking, right? Because who gets to say what's better looking? The dominant group. And the dominant group is white people, right? Sorry, I just had another example of that and I lost it. Yeah, the dominant group is the one who gets to define those things. Oh, most people think British accents sound very sophisticated and intelligent, right? And so when you hear, when you hear Emma Watson from Harry Potter, when you hear her speak, you think, oh, she sounds so sophisticated and intelligent. And part of it is the fact that Emma Watson, I think, is very sophisticated and intelligent, but part of it is the accent, right? We have been socialized to believe that British accents are very classy and very elegant. And so when we hear them, we think, oh, this person must be classy and elegant. But why do we believe that thing in the first place? Why are British accents connected to sophistication and intelligence? Well, because British people have been a dominant group globally, and so they're able to present themselves that way, and we have all been socialized to think that, right? Unfortunately, Canadian accents are not seen as super sophisticated and intelligent, even though some of us are. So Karen, I don't think that's what I was looking for, but I think you're correct in saying that, and you can see that with any dominant group, whatever is seen as um, whatever is defined as beautiful or desirable or intelligent or whatever kind of good qualities you're looking for, it's usually the dominant groups that gets to say what those things are. Okay, so you're definitely right. Um, Racial, okay, so Mashid says, yeah, racial differences are important and unchangeable. I'm just going to try to go to my section of the article where this says, yeah, so racial differences are important and unchangeable. And so what they're kind of saying here is that it doesn't really matter what happens to a person of a particular race, they're always going to be a certain way. And so if we believe, for instance, that um, if the stereotype was that Asians were less intelligent than average, if my wife and I flew to China and we adopted a little Chinese baby and we brought it back here and we raised it ourselves in Canadian culture, the idea is that that Chinese baby would still not be as intelligent because of his race, right? And so that's kind of what this statement is saying, is that the racial differences between people are meaningful and that they cannot be changed or modified, right? Again, we know that's ridiculous. That's not true at all. Let's see, what else, guys? There's more. How about this one? Oh, no, sorry. That's what I just asked you. What about this one? Can't seem to copy it. Okay, give me more. There's more. There's like 5 of them. Beliefs shared by race-based society. Mashid's got one, that racial differences are meaningful and that they are unchangeable. Mashid's here again. She says, differences between races exist in biology. Yeah. So race-based societies believe that people in different races are biologically different from each other, right? There are real, meaningful differences. And of course, we already know that that's not the case. There are some genetic differences, but they are basically minor, and really none of them have to do with any sort of character or intelligence traits, right? Most of them are physical and they're connected to the environment. Tika says, the beliefs are shared by race-based societies, which are distinct in terms of learning and physical characteristics. Oh, okay. Each race has its own culture, and okay, so there's a few things here. So, right, so race-based societies believe that each race is distinct in terms of its, each race is distinct in terms of its learning and physical characteristics. And so there is something about the brains and intelligence and learning capacity and morality. All of these things are actually part of racial genetics, and that they're different between races, right? That's what race-based societies believe. Again, there's nothing to that. That's not true. That's not true in any way. Each race has its own culture. No. There are a huge number of cultures around the world, and they are not necessarily correlated with race, right? Race would claim that all people in Africa, they're all black, and so they all have the same culture. And of course, that's in no way true. Africa is a very culturally rich and diverse place. There's many, many cultures within that one continent, right? And so race does not correlate with culture. And again, with the example I just gave you, if my wife and I go and adopt a Chinese baby in China and we come back here, we're going to raise this baby in Canadian culture. And so in terms of culturally speaking, this child will be Canadian, right? Even though his genes are connected to China and his genes come from China, culturally speaking, he'll be Canadian, and so there's no culture is not genetically encoded, right? We know that. We know that as well. Let's see what else. There's a couple more. Oh, hang on. I think there's only one that we're missing now. Thika's got the last one here, where she says that racial differences should be written into legal codes. And so race-based societies believe that there should be different laws that apply to different races, right? And so if you know anything about World War II and Nazi Germany, you'll know that that was very much the case, right? Adolf Hitler and his Nazis created laws that there was basically one set of laws for pureblood German citizens, and then other people, they had other laws applied to them, right? So Nazi Germany was definitely a race-based society, and race was clearly written into the laws of Nazi Germany. The only one we're missing here, I think, is that is the idea that some races are naturally inferior. Okay, so race-based societies believe that some races are actually better than others, right? And so they determine these things in terms of intelligence or character, in terms of honesty or hardworkingness or whatever. There's an actual hierarchy to races in terms of what race-based societies believe. Again, that's ridiculous. Race is a social construct. It's not a real thing, and there's no hierarchy. There's just nothing to that. It's a made-up idea. But again, race-based societies believe this to be true, right? So I think number 5 we've pretty clearly answered already. I've kind of stepped all over it, and I mentioned it before. Scientists, of course, have confirmed that there's no genetic evidence of race in humans. We're all one race. Maybe a tricky question. Epistemic racism. What is that? What's epistemic racism? Okay, it's universal. Says Baha. Okay. I see everyone's pretty quiet on this, and so are you quiet because you're tired? Are you quiet because you're a little confused? Are you quiet because you're bored? What's going on? Things are a little bit quiet out there. Did you not get that far in the article? What's up? Tell me what's up. Tell me what's going on. Tired, confused, too complicated? What's up? Not sure what the question. Okay, that's fair. To be honest, I did not get. Okay, so not done. That's okay. Same. Okay. This one is a tricky one, and it's probably not. I'll help you out here. This is a tricky one, and it's probably not the most important epistemic racism is not the most important one to remember for us. So I'll deal with it really quickly and then we'll move on. So epistemic racism, same here. Okay, same here. You didn't finish it, or same here. You're not sure with the question. The idea with epistemic racism is connected to our theory of knowledge, right? And so we are questioning how we know what we know, okay? And so all of the things that have been, I think it's because it has to do with the social construction of knowledge. That's very true, Erica. So it has to do with the fact that the ideas, I guess, how do I simplify this? Really easy. The easiest way to talk about this is simply to say that the way in which we see things is always influenced by our socialization and our ideas. And so when we look at other cultures, we're always looking through a lens of our own culture. And and the idea, exactly. So science is like that too, because science is a lens through which people look at the world, but science is also heavily connected to the value system of the West, okay? Because the West is kind of very strongly connected with scientific knowledge and process. And so simply just going about science and trying to do science, you are kind of studying other cultures and studying other ways of knowing with your own, okay? And so the question is that how does epistemic racism talks about the influence of those Western lenses when you look at other cultures? That's basically what it's saying. That's probably not a very good way of describing it, but I think maybe I'll leave it there. This next question is I think it's really easy, but let's see if we can come up with an answer for it. This one, relational racism. What's relational racism? So Casey says it occurs to human relationships where a person experiences discriminatory from the people they encounter with. Mashid says relational racism happens when a person meets racist action in her everyday life. Good. Good. Both of those are good. So I'll see if any other answers come up, but you're both right. So relational racism is racism that takes place in relation to others, and so it's kind of one-on-one interaction. So people telling racist jokes or interacting with someone in a way that is discriminatory, that's relational racism. And it's kind of the easiest one, it's kind of the easiest form of racism to see, right? If somebody says something racist, or if they obviously discriminate or say something hurtful to someone else, that's kind of really easy to see, right? We can identify it very clearly. And so relational racism is the easiest one to see. Now, this is what we'll talk about tomorrow. What is structural racism? This might be a bit of a tricky one, but we'll sort it out. We're all intelligent people, right? We'll get through this. But what is it? What is structural racism? Okay, so Casey says this occurs in social, economic, and political institutions in the society where the dominant group has the power to implement laws and rules. Yeah, that's a big part of it, Casey. So systemic racism has to do with the way that society operates, and so our economic institutions, the thing that keeps our economy going, our political institutions. The racism is kind of baked into those institutions in how they work, okay? And the laws and rules that they create can also have racist outcomes, okay? Eric said it's greatly influenced by politics. That is true. That is true. What else? What else do we have? Oh, Karen says laws put to benefit of the dominant group to make minorities suffer. Yeah, that's it too. I'll see if anyone wants to add, and then I'll try to stitch all these things together. Okay, so you're very right. Systemic racism is racism that's much more difficult to see, okay, because there are little pieces of it all over the place, and the idea is that all of these things kind of work together systematically to advantage one group and disadvantage another group. And so some of them are laws, some of them are policies, sometimes they are kind of the way things are done, sometimes they have to do with sometimes it has to do with the way that cities are zoned, sometimes it has to do with property taxes, sometimes it has to do with school funding, sometimes it has to do with how hospitals run, sometimes it has to do with the political selection process, sometimes it has to do with so many different things. And there are some places that things are obviously racist, and then there are other places where it's not clear, but the problem is that the net result is that one group is disadvantaged and another group is advantaged. And so systemic racism is something that is kind of built up over time, right? And so if you look at the United States and if you look at Canada, you'll see that white people have been the dominant group politically and economically and socially. And so they have taken their prejudicial ideas and they've filtered into all aspects of society. And so white people wind up being advantaged and people of color and indigenous people wind up being disadvantaged. But again, it becomes difficult to see sometimes because there's so many little points, right? There's so many little pieces that are interconnected. And so you can't necessarily point at one thing and say, there's the problem right there. There's usually 100 little problems, and the end result of them is that a minoritized group of people is suffering at the expense of, is suffering, and one group is being benefited. But again, sometimes it's difficult to see and understand how these things work together because sometimes they're not obvious. They're not obvious. And so what people often do is deny it and simply say, well, systemic racism doesn't exist. We just have a few bad apples, right? Or it's just a few bad people over here, but everyone else is good. But that's not the case. And tomorrow we'll talk a little bit more about what systemic racism actually looks like and how it operates and how we can kind of tell that it's happening. Okay. But again, it's a much more difficult thing to see and understand. Relational racism is easy because we can all quickly identify when someone says something racist or obviously discriminates. That's easy to see. Systemic racism is a little more difficult to see, but we'll be able to do it. Okay, so we've been working hard here for about an hour. I think I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to give you the rest of the time today to work on your little micro paper. If you have questions while you're working, you can certainly email me. But otherwise, I'll leave it there. We'll end on systemic racism, and that's what we'll talk about tomorrow. Okay. Um, does anyone have any questions for me before I sign off that you might want me to answer? Questions, comments, statements? Karen's good. I feel like you guys are a little quiet this morning. That's okay, but Tika's good, okay. Casey's good. Jenna's 2 thumbs up. Rashid's good. Sam's good, okay. Ivan's good, okay. All right, so without further ado, I will turn you loose. I'll let you work on your stuff. Again, if you have questions, you can Teams message me. And then for those of you who are in comparative cultures, I'll see you at 10. And for those of you who are not, then I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, so thanks for being here. Those of you who are frowny faced, I hope your frown turns upside down or whatever it is. And yeah, I'll see you a little bit later. Okay, so work hard and see you later or tomorrow. Bye.